They called it progress. He called it desecration. They brought bulldozers and blueprints to erase history, to pave over memory with a layer of concrete and glass. They saw an old building on a forgotten street. He saw a sanctuary. They saw a plot of land ripe for profit. He saw the final resting place of his brothers' souls. They made one critical, irreversible mistake. They forgot that when you try to bury the legacy of an American soldier, you don't just face one man. You face an army. Welcome to NX Incredible Stories. What you are about to hear is not just a story of a zoning dispute. It is a story of a battle for the very soul of a nation, a fight waged not on some foreign shore, but on American soil. This is the story of VFW Post 74, and the last stand that would remind a generation what happens when you corner a lion who has nothing left to lose but the honor he has sworn to protect. To understand the war, you must first understand the ground it was fought on. VFW Post 74 wasn't just a building. It was a time capsule, a living, breathing testament to a century of American sacrifice, tucked away on a quiet street. That time and progress had tried to forget. To walk through its heavy oak doors was to step out of the present and into a hall of ghosts. Not the frightening kind, but the honored kind. The air itself felt different inside. It smelled of old, polished wood, of stale coffee, of decades of cigarette smoke clinging to the rafters. And something else, something intangible. History. The floorboards, worn smooth by a million footsteps, groaned under the weight of memory. The memory of jubilant young men, laughing and drinking in this very hall before shipping off to the blood-soaked beaches of Normandy, the frozen hills of Korea, or the suffocating jungles of Vietnam. Their faces stared back at you from the walls, a gallery of heroes frozen in time. They were captured in faded black and white photographs, their youth and confidence a gut-wrenching contrast to the small brass plaques beneath that listed their final resting places: Iwo Jima, the Pusan Perimeter, Khe-Sanh, Fallujah. You'd see a kid they called Smiling Jimmy Sullivan, the town's golden boy quarterback with a confident smirk, barely 18 when he lied about his age to enlist in '42. His photo was right next to the framed Western Union telegram that had informed his mother he wasn't coming home. There was Sergeant Carlos Ramirez, a stoic Marine, whose eyes held the cold, thousand-yard stare of a man who had survived the hell of the Chosin Reservoir. Next to him, a group of grinning helicopter pilots, their arms slung around each other, their futures as bright as the California sun, frozen in a moment of pure joy before the Tet Offensive rewrote their destinies forever. This wasn't a museum collecting dust. It was a sanctuary, and every object held a sacred story. In one glass case sat a flag, folded with reverent precision into a tight, crisp triangle. The very flag that had draped the coffin of a local boy named Danny Peterson, killed by an IED in the dusty streets of Ramadi. In another, a collection of purple hearts, their ribbons faded to a soft lavender, each one representing a moment of unimaginable pain and a testament to unbreakable courage. Every dent in the old wooden bar, every yellowed newspaper clipping about a local hero pinned to the bulletin board, every challenge coin pressed into the wood told a story of brotherhood, of loss, of a solemn promise whispered from one generation to the next. We will never forget you. For the last decade, that sacred promise had been kept almost single-handedly by one man, Frank Miller. Frank was 75 years old, a Vietnam veteran who had served as a tunnel rat, a job that required a special kind of bravery, forged in darkness and close-quarters combat. The war had taken his youth and his friends, and it had chipped away at his faith in the men who sent boys to fight. but it had failed to break his core of tempered steel. It had given him an unbreakable sense of duty, and as the other members of Post 74 had slowly, inevitably faded away, succumbing to age, to illness, to the ghosts they could no longer outrun, Frank remained. He was the Post's last elected commander, its unpaid janitor, its devoted groundskeeper, and its final solitary guardian. His life was a ritual of remembrance. Every morning, long before the sun rose, Frank would arrive in his old pickup truck. He'd unlock the heavy doors, the sound of the bolt echoing in the vast silent hall. He'd brew a pot of strong black coffee, not just for himself, but for the spirits he shared the space with. Then, his real work would begin. With a soft, clean cloth, he would gently wipe the dust from the glass of each picture frame, his rough, scarred hands moving with a tenderness that defied his gruff exterior. He'd walk the hall, his hand tracing the names engraved on the memorial plaques, murmuring them softly, speaking to his friends. "Morning, Jimmy. Keeping the place warm for you." It wasn't a chore. It was a sacred trust, a conversation with the past. Finally, he would step outside into the quiet morning air, unhook the old, weathered American flag, and raise it slowly up the flagpole. The familiar snap of the fabric catching the wind was his daily salute, his pledge of allegiance, not to a government, but to the men he had sworn never to leave behind. Frank Miller was the last man on the wall, and he would not let it fall. But a storm was gathering on the horizon. It was a modern storm, not of roaring cannons and falling bombs, but of whispering lawyers, slick brochures, and the relentless grinding gears of corporate greed. The storm had a name: Apex Development. Apex was a faceless, billion-dollar real estate juggernaut from the city. They saw the world not in terms of history and honor, but in terms of assets and liabilities. To them, Post 74 wasn't a sanctuary. It was an underperforming asset on a block of underutilized real estate. Their vision for the future didn't include memorial gardens. It included a 5-story luxury condominium complex called the Viridian, complete with a rooftop infinity pool, a state-of-the-art yoga studio, and valet parking. And the humble, 1-story VFW Post 74, with its ghosts and its memories, was standing right in their way. Their emissary was a man named Bradley Thorne, a vice president in his 30s, whose tailored suit probably cost more than Frank's truck. His smile was polished, practiced, and never once reached his cold, calculating eyes. To Thorne, words like honor and sacrifice were abstract marketing terms, to be used in brochures, but never to be taken seriously. He saw Frank Miller not as a decorated hero, but as a stubborn old man, an inconvenient obstacle to a multi-million-dollar deal. The opening salvo in their war was not a bullet, but a letter, delivered by courier in a crisp, offensively white envelope. It was an offer to buy the property, a lowball number, insultingly wrapped in slick corporate jargon about revitalizing the community and pioneering a modern vision for the neighborhood. They had the audacity to call their paltry offer a generous, good faith gesture. Frank read the letter once, his expression unreadable. He didn't curse. He didn't shout. He simply took the glossy, expensive paper, folded it neatly in half, walked over to the old cast-iron furnace that had heated the hall since the 1950s, and dropped it into the flames. He watched the paper curl and blacken, the words generous offer melting into ash. His answer was absolute. This ground had been consecrated by the blood and bravery of better men than Bradley Thorne. Its price was beyond calculation. It was not for sale. Frank thought, perhaps hoped, that this silent, definitive act would be the end of it. He believed that even corporate raiders must have a line they wouldn't cross. He was wrong. Men like Bradley Thorne don't understand honor. They only understand leverage. Frank had just refused to surrender peacefully. Now, Apex Development was preparing to take the ground by force. The old soldier recognized the quiet before the main assault. The battle for the soul of Post 74 was about to begin. If you believe a hero's legacy is worth more than a developer's greed, show your support for Frank and hit that like button. Because as this story continues, you will witness what happens when the relentless force of corporate greed meets the immovable object of a soldier's promise. And it is a collision you will never forget. Frank Miller had stared down enemy soldiers in the suffocating darkness of the Ku Chi tunnels. His breath held, the smell of damp earth and gunpowder thick in his nostrils. He had faced down his own mortality more times than he could count, learning to master the fear that turned other men to stone. He thought he had seen the worst that men could do to each other, the depths of their cruelty and the heights of their indifference. He was wrong. The truest, most gut-wrenching assault of his life came not from a soldier in the jungle, but from a clean-shaven courier in a crisp polo shirt, driving a fuel-efficient sedan. The weapon he carried was not a rifle, but a single sheet of paper, a legal document that felt heavier and more lethal than any ordnance he had ever handled. It was the eviction notice. It was taped unceremoniously to the heavy oak door of Post 74, the cheap adhesive sticking right next to the polished bronze plaque that bore the names of the town's fallen sons. The contrast was a visceral insult. The cold, sterile white of the paper against the warm, aged wood. The soulless, legal jargon of the text against the sacred names of the dead. It was an official declaration of war, disguised as a property seizure notice. Through a series of quiet backroom deals and zoning changes pushed through a city council, all too eager to please a wealthy developer, Apex Development had secured the legal right to seize the property. The justification was a cruel joke: eminent domain for the purpose of urban renewal. They were going to renew the town by bulldozing its very soul. The notice was a death sentence with a deadline: 30 days, 720 hours, and then the bulldozers would arrive. The clock was now ticking, each second a hammer blow against the foundation of Frank's world. The quiet Cold War of letters and defiance was over. The inciting incident had occurred, and the battle for Post 74 had begun in earnest. Frank's objective, once a quiet mission of preservation, was now a desperate, frantic race against time. Save the post, no matter the cost. Like any good soldier, Frank's first instinct was to trust the rules of engagement. He believed, with the fading optimism of his generation, that the system his friends had died to protect would, in the end, protect their memory. He pulled his old suit from the back of the closet, the wool fabric smelling of mothballs and time. It felt foreign on his shoulders, a constricting costume for a battle he didn't understand. He spent 2 days preparing, not cleaning a rifle, but rehearsing a speech. His words clumsy but honest. His arguments built not on legal precedent, but on moral obligation. He walked into the city council chamber, a lion entering a den of smiling wolves. The room was all polished wood and hushed importance, a stage for the performance of civic duty. He saw the council members, their faces practiced masks of polite interest, and he saw Bradley Thorne sitting in the front row with his team of lawyers, radiating an aura of untouchable confidence. When his turn came, Frank stood at the public podium, his scarred hands gripping its edges. He didn't shout. He spoke of the men in the photographs. He spoke of promises made to grieving mothers in this very town. He asked them, his voice low and steady, when did the memory of a hero become worth less than the square footage he occupies? He wasn't just defending a building. He was demanding an answer to a question that cut to the heart of their community, to the heart of the country itself. They listened. They nodded. They looked concerned. The council president, a man whose campaign signs had been plastered with patriotic slogans, looked Frank in the eye and said with unbearable sincerity, "Mr. Miller, we thank you for your service." And then, they unanimously voted to approve the final demolition permit. The sound of the gavel striking the wood was like a gunshot in the silent room. It was the sound of betrayal. Bradley Thorne allowed himself a small, smug smile as he checked his phone. The system hadn't just failed. It had been bought and paid for. Frank walked out of that chamber a different man. The last embers of his faith in the system trampled into dust. He was alone. An old soldier, abandoned by the country he served, facing an enemy whose weapons were contracts and whose armor was money. And the enemy was winning. This was not a new story. It was a tragedy that had played out in countless towns, a quiet war being waged against the past. Frank thought of Old Man Hemlock, a World War II veteran who had lived a few towns over. Hemlock was a paratrooper, one of the original Screaming Eagles of the 101st Airborne. He'd jumped into Normandy on D-Day, fought through the Battle of the Bulge. When he came home, he bought a small house and, in his front yard, erected a single tall flagpole. Every morning for 60 years, he raised the flag. Every evening, he lowered it. It was his ritual, his connection to the boys he'd left behind in the fields of Europe. But his new neighbors, transplants from the city, complained to their homeowners association. The flagpole, they said, violated the neighborhood's aesthetic code. They sent letters. They levied fines. Hemlock, a man who had faced down a German panzer division, fought them. He went to meetings. He wrote letters to the editor. But in the end, the HOA won. One morning, he woke up to the sound of a work crew in his yard. They cut down his flagpole with a power saw and hauled it away like scrap metal. Hemlock died 6 months later. His neighbors said he died of old age. His friends knew he died of a broken heart. The ghost of that defeat haunted Frank as he returned to the empty, silent hall of Post 74. The 30-day notice on the door felt like a tombstone. The weight of failure pressed down on him, suffocating him. He walked to the old wooden bar, poured a glass of whiskey, and stared at the faces on the wall. Jimmy Sullivan's confident smirk seemed to mock him. Sergeant Ramirez's stoic gaze seemed to judge him. He felt their disappointment. He felt their anger. He felt that he, the last guardian, had failed in his duty. He had survived the war, but the peace was killing him. He raised the glass, the amber liquid a tempting promise of numbness, of surrender. This was it, the end of the line. But as he looked at his own reflection in the dusty glass of a picture frame, he didn't see a defeated old man. He saw the face of a 19-year-old tunnel rat, covered in dirt and grime, his eyes wide but defiant in the darkness. He remembered the feeling, the adrenaline, the fear, but underneath it all, a cold, hard certainty. You don't back down. You don't surrender. You adapt. You improvise. You overcome. He was a United States Marine, and his war was not over. He put the glass down, untouched. A new resolve, as hard and cold as forged steel, settled in his soul. He had tried to win by their rules. He had lost. Fine. Now, they would play by his. The rules of engagement had just changed. The enemy thought they had him surrounded and broken. They had no idea that they had just created their own worst nightmare. They had cornered a man with nothing left to lose, and in doing so, they had just made him the most dangerous man in the world. Just when the night seemed its darkest, just when the battle seemed all but lost, a new kind of soldier entered the fray. She didn't arrive with the rumble of a tank or the roar of a jet engine. She arrived with the quiet click of a keyboard. Her weapons weren't forged in steel. They were forged in fiber optics and code. Her name was Sarah Jones, and she was about to show Apex Development what a 21st century war for hearts and minds truly looked like. Sarah was a Marine, through and through. She had served 2 grueling tours in the rugged mountains of Afghanistan, not as an infantryman, but as a communications specialist. While others fought with rifles, she fought with information. She had waged war against an invisible enemy in a landscape of signals and satellites, learning firsthand that the most powerful weapon in the modern world isn't the one that makes the loudest noise. It's the one that tells the most compelling story. Now, a civilian, she was a fiery young lawyer, but the Marine Corps ethos, Semper Fidelis, always faithful, was burned into her soul. She stumbled upon the story of Frank Miller and Post 74 by accident, a 30-second clip buried on a local news website. Most people would have scrolled past, another sad story in a world full of them. But Sarah saw something that stopped her cold. She saw the quiet, unyielding dignity in Frank Miller's posture as he faced down the smirking politicians. She saw the flicker of defiant fire in his eyes, a fire she recognized from the best battlefield leaders she had ever known. She didn't just see an old man losing a building. She saw a fellow Marine, a brother in arms, being overrun, and she knew in her bones that you never, ever leave a Marine behind. The next morning, her car kicked up dust on the gravel driveway of Post 74. She found Frank inside, not defeated but regrouping, methodically cleaning an old M1 Garand that was part of a memorial display. The meeting was a study in contrasts, a bridge between 2 different Americas. Frank, the old guard, a man who trusted his hands, his instincts, and the weight of a rifle on his shoulder. Sarah, the new guard, a warrior who trusted data, networks, and the power of a story to move at the speed of light. Frank was wary. He looked at her laptop and her smartphone with the suspicion of a man who believed true battles were fought in dirt and mud, not on a screen. "What's a hashtag going to do against a bulldozer, kid?" he asked, his voice rough as gravel. Sarah met his gaze without blinking, her own eyes reflecting a fire he understood. "Sir," she said, her voice crisp and clear, "a hashtag is an army you can't see. It's an army with no borders and no supply lines. And it's an army that moves faster than any bulldozer ever could. You fought your war in the jungle. I fought mine in the digital ether. The battlefield has changed, but the mission hasn't. It's time to call in air support." An alliance was forged, not in a handshake, but in a shared, silent nod of understanding. The wisdom of the old guard uniting with the tactical brilliance of the new. Their mission, to take the quiet, lonely battle for Post 74 and turn it into a national crusade. Their counteroffensive began not with a bang, but with a click. Sarah's plan was simple and devastatingly effective. She spent the afternoon with Frank, not planning a protest, but conducting an interview. With her phone's camera, she had him walk through the hallowed hall and tell the stories. He wasn't speaking to a camera. He was speaking to his brothers. His voice, thick with emotion, brought the photos to life. He spoke of Tommy Sullivan, the town's football hero who was killed in Fallujah, and how the whole town had lined the streets for his funeral. He pointed to the Sanchez brothers, who both served in Korea, came home, and ran the town's hardware store for 50 years. Their integrity, a local legend. Frank didn't just list names and dates, he resurrected souls. Sarah then skillfully intercut this raw, powerful testimony with cold, hard facts. The legal jargon of the eviction notice, the smug face of Bradley Thorne at the council meeting, the soulless architectural renderings of the luxury condos meant to replace this sacred history. The video ended with one single haunting shot. Frank, alone in the dawn light, slowly raising the American flag in front of the doomed building, a solitary sentinel guarding a forgotten promise. She uploaded the video with a simple, powerful title, "They're evicting our heroes." And she added the hashtag, #SavePost74. Then, she deployed it. She didn't just post it on her own page. She acted like the communications specialist she was, strategically seeding the video into the digital trenches where it would do the most good. It went to Marine Corps forums. It went to the Facebook pages of every VFW and American Legion post in the country. It was emailed to veteran influencers, patriotic bloggers, and military news outlets. For the first few hours, it was a spark. Then, it became a wildfire. The story of a forgotten battleship museum, the USS Texas, serves as a powerful testament to this strategy. For years, the historic dreadnought, a veteran of both world wars, was rusting away in its berth, in danger of being scrapped. The government funds weren't there, but a small group of volunteers started an online campaign. Their videos showing the leaking hull and their passionate pleas to save this piece of history went viral. Small donations, $5 here, $10 there, poured in from every corner of the globe. The public outcry shamed the state legislature into action. The digital campaign raised millions, saving the ship and ensuring its legacy for future generations. It proved that a dedicated army of ordinary people, united online, could achieve what government bureaucracy could not. Sarah Jones was about to prove it again. The #SavePost74 hashtag became a digital rallying cry. Veterans started posting photos of their own hometown posts, sharing their own stories of brotherhood and remembrance. The fight for one post in one forgotten town became a nationwide movement for all of them. The comments section of the video became a virtual memorial wall, thousands of messages pouring in. "Semper Fi, brother, we stand with you." My grandfather's picture hangs in a post just like this in Ohio. An attack on one is an attack on all. Just booked a flight from Florida. We're on our way. Have you ever stood up for something you truly believe in, against all odds? Tell us your story in the comments below. Every voice adds to the chorus of honor. Back in his gleaming high-rise office, Bradley Thorne watched the metrics with contempt. He saw the soaring view counts, the trending hashtag, but he dismissed it as online noise, the meaningless chatter of nobodies. He failed to understand that behind every view, every comment, every share was a human heart, a patriot, a potential soldier in Frank's army. In a fit of supreme arrogance, he decided to silence the noise with a show of force. He ordered a construction crew to erect a tall, imposing chain-link fence around Post 74. It went up overnight, an ugly metal scar on the landscape topped with barbed wire. It was meant to be a final, non-negotiable statement. This property belongs to us. The debate is over. It was the greatest tactical blunder of his career. He thought he was building a wall to keep people out. In reality, he had just built the very stage upon which his own downfall would be broadcast to the world. He thought he was ending the story. In fact, he had just given an army of patriots a line to hold, a fortress to defend, and a physical symbol of the tyranny They were all gathering to fight. The fence was not a barrier. It was an invitation. And the cavalry was coming. The ugly chain-link fence was a declaration of war, a cold metallic scar drawn across the heart of the community. It was Bradley Thorne's final arrogant answer to Frank Miller's defiance. To the corporate mind of Apex Development, it was a simple asset protection measure, a physical barrier to end the embarrassing digital protest. They believed that a wall of steel could silence a whisper of honor. They failed to understand that their fence was not a barrier. It was a magnet. It was a line in the sand that drew a response not in tweets and hashtags, but in worn-out leather, diesel fuel, and the unshakable resolve of a forgotten army. The first act of physical resistance was a quiet one, but it resonated with the power of a cannon shot. The morning after the fence went up, Frank Miller walked out of the heavy oak doors of Post 74. He wasn't carrying a protest sign. He was carrying the Post's official colors, the old flag with its faded battle streamers from conflicts long past, its fabric steeped in the history of men who had fought under it. He walked to the new padlocked gate, planted the base of the flagpole firmly on the ground, and stood his ground. He was soon joined by his three old friends, the quiet Air Force mechanic, the gruff Navy Seabee, and the old Army medic from the Battle of the Bulge. 4 old men, a silent honor guard, not protesting, but bearing witness. They stood for an hour, then 2, a small, stubborn island of defiance against a tide of corporate indifference. A single security guard, a young man hired by Apex, watched them from his car, his face a mixture of pity and confusion, unwilling to enforce an order he knew in his gut was wrong. That single image, captured by a local photographer and uploaded by Sarah Jones, was the signal fire. It was the spark that ignited the prairie, and the cavalry answered the call. It began with a sound, a low rumble on the horizon that grew into the deafening, soul-stirring roar of 100 V-twin engines. They came in a wave of chrome and black leather. The veteran motorcycle clubs, the Iron Patriots, the Leathernecks, the Infidels. These weren't angry kids looking for trouble. They were gray-bearded, stoic men in their 50s and 60s, their faces maps of hard-won experience. Their bikes, polished and powerful, lined the street opposite the post, a gleaming phalanx of steel. Their leader, a former Force Recon Marine with eyes that had seen too much, dismounted, walked straight to Frank, and said only 2 words: "We're here." It was all that was needed. They brought coffee, blankets, and an intimidating presence that said more than words ever could. "You are not alone. We have your back." Then came the families. An old, sputtering RV chugged up the street, a family from 3 states away spilling out. The father, a Gulf War Army vet, found Frank and shook his hand, his grip like iron. "Saw the video," he said simply. "Told my wife to pack up the kids. This isn't just your post, brother. It's all of ours. When they come for one, they come for all of us." His children, no older than 10, held up handmade signs that read, "Honor our heroes," and "My daddy is a vet." They were followed by pickup trucks and minivans, each one carrying another family, another story, another reason to be there. A bus, chartered by Sarah Jones, pulled up from a nearby military base, and 24 young, active-duty Marines and soldiers, off-duty and in civilian clothes, stepped out and fell into a disciplined formation, their presence a silent, powerful endorsement that sent a clear message to the city council. Your troops are watching you. The most poignant arrival was a solitary one. A quiet, elderly woman with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun. Her name was Evelyn Gable. She carried a single framed 8x10 photo. It was her son, a young Army Ranger killed in the mountains of Afghanistan. She didn't say a word. She walked through the growing crowd, straight to Frank Miller, and simply stood beside him, holding her son's smiling face for the world to see. She was a Gold Star mother. Her silent, graceful presence sanctified the ground, elevating the protest into a sacred duty. The crowd parted for her with a reverence usually reserved for clergy. By nightfall, the quiet suburban street had been transformed. It was now a bustling, organized encampment, a forward operating base in the war for America's memory. Tents were erected with military precision. A field kitchen, nicknamed Salty's Galley, and run by a retired Navy cook who barked orders with cheerful authority, was serving up hot chili and coffee. Sarah Jones had established a command tent, the nerve center of the operation, a hive of activity buzzing with the glow of laptops and the hum of portable generators as she and a team of young, tech-savvy vets coordinated logistics, managed a flood of online donations, and fed a constant stream of updates to a global audience. The air was thick with the smell of wood smoke and Brotherhood. As darkness fell, the encampment glowed with the light of dozens of campfires. Around them, the real magic happened. Old men who hadn't spoken of the war in 50 years found themselves sharing stories with young men and women fresh from the deserts of the Middle East. A Vietnam vet quietly showed a young Marine how to properly fold a flag. A World War II nurse shared a blanket with a female medic from the Iraq War. They discovered that while their wars were different, the language of sacrifice, of loss, and of the unbreakable bond forged in shared hardship was universal. Later that night, long after the news crews had packed up, Frank walked through the camp. It was his quiet moment, a solitary patrol through the heart of the army he had summoned. He saw the faces illuminated by the firelight and felt a sense of belonging he thought was lost forever. He saw his own 19-year-old self in the impossibly young, confident eyes of a Marine who had just come home from Helmand Province. He saw his lost friend, Jimmy, in the easy laughter of a group of Army vets. For the first time in decades, he was not alone in his memories. He was home. He was no longer a solitary guardian of a forgotten hall. He was the commander of an army of honor, an army that had answered a call that only they could hear. Naturally, the media descended like vultures, but this time, they were on the right side. The story was too powerful, too visually compelling to ignore. The narrative of the lone, heroic veteran against the greedy corporation was irresistible. The siege at Post 74, one network called it, "The battle for America's soul," declared another. Sarah Jones, with her sharp, articulate passion, became the face of the movement, giving interviews that were equal parts legal analysis and patriotic fire. She masterfully contrasted Frank's quiet dignity with Bradley Thorne's soulless corporate greed, framing the fight not as a local dispute, but as a defining moment for the country. And in his sterile, soundproofed office 50 stories above the city, Bradley Thorne watched it all on a wall of monitors, his face a mask of cold fury. He didn't see honor. He saw an illegal occupation. He didn't see patriots. He saw a mob. He saw the faces of the old veterans and was filled with a familiar, acidic contempt. "Look at them," he muttered to the empty room, clinging to the past. "My own father. Same thing. Wasted his whole life telling stories about the glory days while the world moved on. This isn't about a building, it's a disease." His fight wasn't just about money anymore. It was about eradicating a worldview he despised, a world of sentiment and memory that he saw as weakness. His authority had been mocked on national television. This was personal. He would not be beaten by this circus. He would crush it. He picked up his phone, his knuckles white. He didn't call his lawyers. He didn't call his PR team. He called the head of the demolition company. His voice was low, devoid of emotion, as cold and hard as the steel blade of a bulldozer. "I don't care if the President of the United States is standing there," he hissed. "Your contract is with Apex Development. Your contract is to clear that lot. You will move in at 0500 hours with your full crew. You will not stop for anyone or anything. This ends tomorrow." He hung up. He had given his final order. He had chosen overwhelming force. Across town, in the chilly night air of the encampment, a lone bugle began to play the haunting, mournful notes of taps. The veterans stood, their hands over their hearts. They knew the final battle was coming with the dawn. The lines were drawn. The army was assembled. And as the last note faded into the darkness, only one question remained. Who would hold the line? The air at 0500 was sharp and cold, carrying the metallic scent of diesel fuel and the palpable tension of a battle about to be joined. The first rays of sunlight sliced through the dawn mist, glinting off the massive steel blades of two yellow bulldozers. They were monstrous, inhuman beasts of iron and hydraulic power, idling at the edge of the street, their engines a low, guttural rumble that seemed to shake the very ground. Flanked by a fleet of dump trucks and heavy equipment, they were the modern-day cavalry of corporate conquest, an army sent not to liberate, but to annihilate, to erase. A line of police cars, their lights flashing in the gray light, formed a reluctant perimeter, a government-sanctioned escort for the desecration that was about to occur. This was it, the final showdown, the moment of truth. From his soundproofed office 50 stories above the city, Bradley Thorne watched, on a high-definition monitor, a cup of expensive coffee in his hand. He saw the scene as a simple equation of power. On one side, his multi-million-dollar machines and the full weight of the law. On the other, what he saw as a disorganized mob of has-beens. He expected a few token shouts, a brief, easily contained scuffle, and then the inevitable satisfying crunch of his machines tearing into the old building. He was about to receive a brutal lesson in a kind of power that cannot be bought, sold, or calculated on a spreadsheet. As the lead bulldozer revved its engine, a deafening roar that ripped through the morning stillness, the veterans moved. They did not shout. They did not surge forward. They moved as one, with the quiet, disciplined precision of men who understood formation and purpose. Led by Frank Miller and Sarah Jones, they walked past the ugly chain-link fence and formed a line, shoulder to shoulder, directly in the path of the approaching machine. They were a human barricade. They were the line of honor. This was not a mob. This was a mosaic of American history, standing defiant. Frank stood at the center, the old tattered flag of Post 74 held firmly in his hands, its pole planted on the asphalt like a spear. To his right, Sarah Jones stood at a perfect parade rest, her Marine Corps bearing an unyielding rebuke to the chaos. To his left, the old Army medic sat proudly in his wheelchair, his gnarled fingers clutching a small American flag, his chin held high, and all around them, the line grew. A 90-year-old World War II veteran, his back bent by age but his spine rigid with pride, stood next to a young female Marine with a state-of-the-art prosthetic leg, her jaw set like granite. A massive bearded biker, a man who had seen hell in the Mekong Delta, stood with silent tears carving paths through the grime on his face, his giant hands clenched at his sides. Mrs. Evelyn Gable, the Gold Star mother, was there, holding the framed photo of her fallen son against her chest like a shield. They were black, white, and brown. They were old, young and broken. They were the living, breathing embodiment of the promise that building represented, and their message was silent, absolute, and clear. To get to this post, you will have to go through us. The lead bulldozer lurched forward a few feet, its massive blade lowering, scraping against the asphalt with a scream of tortured metal. The line did not move. They did not flinch. They simply stood, a wall of flesh, bone, and unbreakable moral certainty. The police captain, a man whose own father had been a Marine, nervously spoke into his radio, his eyes fixed on the impossible standoff. In the cab of the lead bulldozer, a young driver named Dave felt a cold sweat break out on his forehead. His supervisor's voice crackled in his headset, a tinny, impatient squawk. "What are you waiting for? Push 'em back, they'll move. It's your job." Dave's hands tightened on the controls. His job. He had a wife and a baby on the way. He needed this job. But as he looked through the thick plate glass of his cab, he didn't just see a crowd. He saw individuals. He saw the medals pinned to their chests, small spots of color against their worn jackets. He saw the flags, and his eyes locked onto Evelyn Gable, the Gold Star mother. She wasn't shouting. She was just standing there, her expression one of profound, heartbreaking sorrow, clutching the photo of a young man his own age, a man in uniform, smiling at a future he would never get to see. Dave thought of his own unborn son. He thought of the kind of world he was helping to create, a world where you could bulldoze a memorial for a paycheck. The supervisor's voice squawked again, angrier this time. "Move it. Now." Dave looked at the throttle. He looked at the line of heroes. He looked at the face of the fallen soldier in the photograph. He looked at his own reflection in the glass, and he saw the choice he had to make. For a long minute that stretched into an eternity, the world held its breath. Then, with a decisive, final click, he reached up and killed the engine. The sudden, shocking silence was more powerful than any explosion. The roar of the machine died, and in its place was a stillness so profound you could hear the snap of the flags in the morning breeze. Dave opened the cab door and climbed down, his movements heavy but certain. He pulled off his yellow hard hat, his hands shaking slightly, and walked toward the line of honor. He didn't stop until he was standing in front of Frank Miller. His eyes, full of a respect that no paycheck could buy, met the old soldier's. "My dad," he said, his voice thick with an emotion he didn't try to hide, "was 101st Airborne. I can't do this." He then turned, walked to the end of the veterans' line, and took his place among them. He had chosen his side. That single act of moral courage was a detonation. It sent a shockwave through the entire scene. The driver of the second bulldozer, seeing what had happened, immediately shut off his own engine and gave a slow, deliberate thumbs up to Dave. A spontaneous cheer erupted from the veterans, a raw, triumphant sound of victory. The construction foreman, his face pale with disbelief, screamed into his radio. The police captain, a slow smile spreading across his face, walked over to Frank. "We're not moving your people, sir," he said, his voice firm. "Not today." The system, it turned out, still had a soul. Circling high above, news helicopters captured the entire incredible drama. The image was broadcast live, across the nation, across the world. The silent yellow monsters of industry, defeated. The lone construction worker standing with the heroes. The wall of honor, unbroken. In his office, Bradley Thorne watched his monitor, his mouth agape, his coffee cup slipping from his fingers and shattering on the marble floor. The smug confidence drained from his face, replaced by a mask of horrified disbelief, which quickly curdled into pure, impotent rage. He watched his multi-million-dollar plan, his career-defining project, his entire worldview, evaporate in a single defiant act of conscience. His phone began to ring, a shrill, incessant scream that sounded like a death knell. He looked at the caller ID. It was the CEO. On another screen, the financial news ticker told the story in brutal, unforgiving numbers. The stock symbol for Apex Development, APX, was next to a plunging blood-red arrow in a catastrophic freefall. His career wasn't the only thing that was over. The demolition foreman, his face ashen, took the final call. He shouted to his crew, his voice cracking with defeat. "Pack it up, it's over, we're out of here." The sound of the diesel engines rumbled to life one last time. But now, it was not the sound of an attack. It was the sound of retreat. One by one, the yellow monsters turned their backs, their massive blades raised in surrender, and retreated in a parade of shame. The veterans in the line of honor did not cheer now. They stood in a quiet, profound, and solemn silence, watching until the last truck had disappeared down the street. The line had held. The sanctuary was safe. The retreat of the Bulldozers was not an end, but a beginning. The victory at Post 74 sent shockwaves, not just through the town, but through the corporate boardrooms of America. Apex Development was in a full-blown crisis. Their brand was toxic, their stock was plummeting, and their name was synonymous with disrespect for American heroes. They were losing millions by the hour. A desperate act of damage control was needed, and it had to be massive. Within a week, in a stunning reversal, the CEO of Apex Development held a press conference. Flanked by nervous lawyers, he announced that the company was not only canceling the demolition of Post 74, but was establishing a $10 million national foundation. The Apex American Veterans Heritage Fund, dedicated to identifying, restoring, and preserving historic veteran posts across the United States. Their very first project, he announced with a forced smile, would be a complete state-of-the-art restoration of VFW Post 74. It was a blatant, cynical PR move, but it was an unconditional surrender. Frank and Sarah had won a victory beyond their wildest dreams. They hadn't just saved their post, they had created a lifeline for hundreds of others. The months that followed were a whirlwind of positive action. Post 74 was not just restored, it was reborn. The building was declared a National Historic Landmark, forever protecting it from the grasp of developers. The best architects and builders, many of whom were veterans themselves who volunteered their time, worked to modernize the facilities while painstakingly preserving every historical detail. The old photos were professionally restored and rehung. The memorial plaques were polished until they gleamed. The surrounding land, once slated for a luxury pool, was transformed into a beautiful public memorial park, with a quiet garden and a walkway of engraved bricks, honoring local veterans from every conflict. Post 74 was no longer a forgotten relic. It became a vibrant hub for the entire community, a place where old veterans could mentor young ones, where military families could find support, and where school children could come to learn about the real-life heroes from their own town. It had become what it was always meant to be, a living bridge between the past, the present, and the future. This story, the story of the last stand at Post 74, holds within it a powerful, timeless lesson. It teaches us that honor isn't found in glass towers or corporate profits. It's forged in sacrifice and preserved in remembrance. It teaches us that a legacy is not a liability to be cleared away for something new, but a foundation upon which a stronger future is built. It shows us that when the cynicism of the modern world tries to tell us that the old ways of duty and brotherhood are obsolete, generations can unite to prove them wrong. The most important battles are not always fought overseas. Sometimes, the most profound victories are won right here at home, defending the very soul of our communities. The story reached its final beautiful conclusion on a bright, sunny afternoon at the rededication ceremony of the new and improved Post 74. The crowd was enormous. Veterans in crisp uniforms stood next to families with strollers. Politicians who had once ignored Frank now stood in line to shake his hand. At the heart of the ceremony, Frank Miller, looking sharper than he had in years, stood beside Sarah Jones. Together, they walked to the new flagpole in the center of the memorial garden. The old, tattered flag that Frank had so faithfully guarded was ceremoniously folded by a Marine honor guard and presented to him. Then, Frank and Sarah took the ropes of the new flag. As the bugle played "To the Colors," they began to raise it. The old soldier and the young warrior, hand over hand, raising the symbol of their nation high into the sky. It was a passing of the torch, a promise renewed. The flag reached the top of the pole and unfurled in the wind, a brilliant splash of red, white, and blue against the clear sky. The legacy was safe. The line had held. The honor was restored. Some battles are fought with bullets, others are fought with silence, with standing your ground when it would be easier to walk away. And sometimes, the quietest stands echo, the loudest across time. Frank Miller didn't set out to be a hero. He didn't want a spotlight, a statue, or a parade. All he wanted was to keep a promise, to remember, to protect something sacred in a world moving too fast to care. But in doing so, he reminded a generation, and perhaps this country, of something we've been in danger of forgetting: that the foundation of any great nation isn't steel or concrete. It's memory, it's sacrifice, it's the quiet strength of men and women who never asked for thanks, but who gave everything anyway. Maybe that's what this story is really about. Not just about saving a building, but about remembering who we are when we're at our best. About what it means to stand for something, even when you stand alone. About the simple truth that honor is not a relic of the past, but a light we pass from one generation to the next. So, wherever you are tonight, whether you served or you love someone who did, or you've ever found yourself standing in front of something you refused to let fall, know this: the line held, and because it did, something deeper than bricks and mortar was preserved: our story. If this story moved you, if you believe in honoring the people and places that shaped us, please like this video, share it with someone who still believes in the quiet power of doing the right thing. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more incredible stories that remind us who we are. Thank you for listening. And to every veteran watching, we remember, we honor, we will not forget.